And the 1881 date is important to me for that reason, but also because it's connected with an event in America. It's to do with a prominent man in America called President Garfield. And he was assassinated in that year, and he was a Freemason, as many presidents were. And a statue that was put up in the Capitol, in front of the Capitol building, to him, shows a zodiac on it. And this zodiac, very, very strangely, this was a piece of research that was developed by a man called David Overson, an excellent book that he wrote. This statue, the zodiac, has two suns on it. So there's a sort of hidden connection, a sort of esoteric connection between the possible periodic return of this and its most distant point being marked by a cataclysmic event, the assassination of a president, and the raising of this very strange, prominent object in the middle of Washington, which has no rational explanation at all. It's a little bit like the famed or infamous Elvis headstone, which is spelt wrong, which, many people say, oh, does that mean he really died? Well, it's a bit like that. Why on earth do you put a zodiac on a tombstone or on a monument that's clearly wrong? You're trying to make a point.
Could there be some ritualistic aspect behind this, do you think? Tying in the murder itself and, of course, then the subsequent, monument being put up like a sacrifice in a sense, I guess, that this is to mark the spot when this is, as you say, when the comet is the furthest away from us?
Well, it's a very interesting idea. I mean, I certainly want to, even over 125 years or so since his death, I wouldn't want to sort of try and rewrite history by alleging that he'd been ritually murdered or anything. But I mean, it's kind of interesting because the dark star, the point where it's at its furthest, would be the death point rather than the life point. Yeah. It appears in the sky as a bright object at its perihelion. It's the return of life. It's the return of the phoenix, the return of life. It has the sort of Christ feel to it. At its furthest point, its most distant, its coldest, its furthest away from the sun, it's at its death point. So as you say, there's this sort of symbolic significance attached to it. But whether Garfield's assassination was contrived in such a way as the sort of death of the Sun King, in that sort of symbolic way, I mean, that might be stretching it a bit far, but it's certainly an interesting idea. But I would have thought that that event took on symbolic meaning within the esoteric groups that he was amongst, and 1881 was already deemed to be quite important. I mean, it was a date highlighted by particularly Madame Blavatsky, the Theosophical Society. She talks about it at some length, although some people consider her to be something of a fraud. But nevertheless, 1881 is one of these dates that's sort of highlighted as being esoterically important, above and beyond the assassination of the President of America.
Really? And did Blavatsky write about this, or was there something that she did during this time, or what was it?
What, Madame Blavatsky? What, do you mean Madame Blavatsky? Or?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Oh, I mean, her writings are. I know of her writings. I know of references to her writings. I must admit, I've never actually sit down and read them myself. But she does make reference. But then, Madame Blavatsky is a very controversial figure. I mean, her writings are considered to some to be completely fraudulent. So it's difficult to put too much emphasis on them. It's clearly within the esoteric field that date has significance. It portends sort of a major event, and of course the President of America did die on that particular year, which at the time was probably to the contemporaries of that period a sort of very grave event, in the same way that Kennedy getting shot was to us. But I wouldn't want to put too much emphasis on the writings of Madame Blavatsky, because her work is very controversial, and it's difficult to get through that in a very clear way, because it's a bit of a jumble, to be honest.
Sure. Okay. Yeah. And one thing I did want to run by you here is that because you mentioned the Hebrew calendar, I think that is if I calculated that correct, I think now it's at the year 5767, I think, or something like that at least. And one interesting connection with that, potentially then, speaking about the Freemasons among other things, is they have their own calendar. I don't know if you're aware of that or not, but the dating is called AL. That means Anno Lucius, meaning for in the year of light, basically. And according to that calendar, now we're in the year 6007. So we're the Hebrew calendar and the Anno Lucius Freemasonic calendar are very similar regarding the date. So that potentially could be an interesting connection. I don't know.
Well, it's not something I've come across, but it certainly sounds fascinating for sure. And there are, important connections to be made here. This particular aspect of work can throw up lots and lots of clues as to the arrival of this planet and the sort of mythological connotations that revolve around it. And my major contention here is that the arrival of the planet is significant enough, whether it causes catastrophe or not, is significant enough for everyone to start the clocks again. You see this thing appear in the sky, and people say, right, that's it, the old age is now finished, it's the new age of the Lord, and we start the clocks from here. And I think that's where I'm at, really. The difficulty with the most previous return, if we were going along the timelines we've been discussing, is trying to pinpoint exactly what the Star of Bethlehem was. And although obviously there's evidence in the sort of biblical narrative from the New Testament, when you actually try and look into it and try and find evidence for, say, an observation of a star that occurred at that time, that's not in a religious record, it's very, very difficult to pin something down. But of interest, and one of the things that I sort of researched some years ago, is the fact that around that period of time, ancient peoples used to, in their records, or some of the observers at that time, used to record Sirius, which is a very sort of bright white star, being red, and it's called the red Sirius anomaly. And I've often wondered whether that's connection, that there might be a connection between the sort of arrival of a red star in the sky and the fact that the brightest star in the sky is miscoloured. So there's a thought. And that's as close as I can get to pinpointing, Nibiru during the Messianic era. Is the fact that when they were, talking about Sirius, they were talking about a red star. But that's as close as I can get, and it seems very, very difficult to sort of pin it down any further than that, to be honest with you.
You mentioned also, of course, the kind of significance that an event like this would have on history, either if it's about resetting the calendars or the date stamp, basically setting it back to zero again. There are, for example, speaking of the Rosicrucians again, I read in, I think it was called, The Real History of the Rosicrucians by A.E. Waite, that the comet of 1572 was declared by Paracelsus, among others, to be the sign and harbinger of approaching revolution. And then just a few years later, in 1604, there was a supernova, a bright new evening star that was discovered by Johannes Kepler, and there seems to be a connection. I'm not sure exactly at which date here, either if it's Paracelsus or if it's at the second, the supernova at 1604. But there seemed to be some kind of indication that the Rosicrucians was actually started at around this time, either by John Dee or Francis Bacon or both of these guys. I don't know, but this seems at least to indicate the fact that there is, an event like this actually pinpoints that they're trying to do something new. They're trying to create a revolution or a new enlightenment or something. So this is again tying back to that fact that this is an important event in human history, and people experiencing this are trying to do something with it, so to speak.
I think it's sort of going along with this idea. I think that's a very, very interesting analysis, and I think there's probably some truth in that. All of these esoteric traditions are effectively holding on to very, very ancient knowledge, which is maintained as an important secret that infidels or the uninitiated just shouldn't get hold of. And what happens with these traditions is that the information that is so sacred to the cult or the sect that's guarding it becomes coded in such a way that the core teaching is lost over time, and that what is transmuted down the generations, a bit like Chinese whispers, I suppose, is the symbolism of the teaching rather than the actual teaching itself. So, say for instance, in the subject matter we're discussing, the esoteric society or the sect or the cult of initiates who holds onto the information, say the followers of Horus, let's say, an Egyptian cult that passed things down to sort of modern day Europe eventually. Their knowledge would be held in the form of symbolism. It would be in the form of pictures, symbols, strange writings, strange texts, which don't necessarily make an awful lot of sense, even to the people who are holding that information. And I think that's what's going on here with this planet. It's extremely sacred. The knowledge of it is absolutely at the sort of the cult point of the higher echelons of our society, the Freemasons, the Rosicrucians, people within our societies who become the movers and the shakers, and the societies guard that knowledge, only let people in who they think can handle it. So they hold on to this information, but they've actually lost the essential sort of factual points that point to dates, that point to when it's going to happen, what will happen when it does happen. And all they hold on to is the fact that, there is this red god out there, and it reappears every so often, and when it does, things change. And that those societies, in the same way that sort of Christians await the second coming of Christ, or other traditions await the return of prophets or what have you, those esoteric societies are sat waiting, and each generation thinks, is it going to be my generation? Is it going to be during my lifetime that this thing returns? So as you say, around about 1600, stars start to appear in the sky. They trigger off that sort of thinking, oh, this is it, I'm the generation where this is going to happen. And the movements move, someone within the movement says, okay, this is it, this is our moment, we are now going to instigate a revolution, we are now going to bring forth our religion and bring it out into the public and make people aware, because this is our time. And you may well be right. And of course the calamity for the Rosicrucians, if that is the case, is that they did it at the wrong time. A supernova appears, or some other sort of fairly rare but nevertheless understandable phenomenon appears, and they say, right, that's it, we're going to come out in the open and we're going to revolutionise the world because we're the keepers of true knowledge, and they're about 2,000 years too short. So it's an interesting idea. The Rosicrucians fascinate me for a number of different reasons, and one of them is that a lot of their symbolism is absolutely clearly related to the Dark Star. It's absolutely spot on. So much so that I've actually had correspondence with several members of Freemasonic Rosicrucian orders who've been quite fascinated by what I've had to say, really. Because they don't necessarily know the secrets or know the answers any more than you or I do. They're looking for answers to the symbolism. They got the symbolism, they got the traditions, they got the writings that are passed down to them, but they don't necessarily know what they mean any more than you or I do. They speculate and they conjecture based on what knowledge they've received.
That's
so,
yeah.
Someone like